All right. Good morning, everybody. Today is Daf Vav. But we left off yesterday. Shkach Levi for taking over yesterday. We left off yesterday. So there's a little bit of ambiguity regarding one who goes ahead and he borrows an item or perhaps even rents it and also has the owner's services with them. So in such a case, he's pater, even though he's a shayel, he's pater because it's a special halacha of bail of imo. So Abayi Savar, is that where he got to? Yeah. Okay, it's like 7 lines from the bottom or so. Yeah. Okay. So Abayi Savar Rabbi Yeshia umataritz lekroi Rabbi Yeshia and Rava Savar Rabbi Yonasan umataritz lekroi Rabbi Yonasan. So Abayi and Rava had a difference, a little difference in terms of how to understand the psukim and the Braistas, and it's based upon something that I actually touched upon. I think it was Friday. Oh no, actually it was Shabbos' daf. Where's my? So over there, had to do with, and in other words, when you have a vav and a pasuk, is it assuming to be both together or so Rabbi Yosha says it's or right, either one. Only if it says yachdav, right? You don't need, excuse me, you don't. And now, if it says, we assume it's together, you don't need the word yachdav, right? So therefore, the vav assumes that they're together. So therefore, in this case, so you really need both together in order to be pater. So let's see what we're talking about. So Abai Sarah Rabbi Yeshua Matar Zek Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Masar Rabbi Yonasan Matar Zek Rabbi Yonasan. Abai Sarah Rabbi Yeshua Matar Zek Rabbi Yeshua. What does it mean? Balav Einimo Shalom Yishalom. The pasuk says, and if the owner is not with him, in other words, he borrows an animal and the owner is not with him, then he pays. Satam the less of a tarvayu. So the mashma over there is that he's not in both, i.e., at the time of where it died or broken or died, and the time we borrowed it. But let's say the owner was working for him either at the time of the accident or at the time of the borrowing, then he would be pater, right? But let's say pater. But it says that the owner's with him, he shouldn't pay. So the reason is the owner is with him both times when he borrows it and at the time of the accident. But let's say he was only in one of them, but less of a not in the other word. And the other, he wasn't, borrowed, his services weren't borrowed at the time. So then you'd be mechayev. So to tell you, so that comes to tell you that no, that if he was with him during the time of the borrowing, then he doesn't have to go ahead and beat him with the time of the break, and still considered to be putter because when the moment when he borrowed it, the owner was actually, he was working for him, borrowed it. But he was with him during the time of the accident, whether it broke a limb or it died, then it has to be b'shas shela. So according to Abaye, the key time is during the time when I go ahead and I lend out my animal. If I lend out my animal and I'm also lending out my services, or I already started to lend out my services to the guy who's borrowing it, then he's pater from any accident. However, for the time when he borrowed it, only later on he says, "Yo, can you go ahead and also work for me?" And even though the accident happens later on, doesn't make a difference because the time of the borrowing, my services were not borrowed to the borrower. And Rava Savar like Rabbi Yonasan. Rava actually explained a psukim like Rabbi Yonasan, and even though he comes to the same conclusion. Nevertheless, he does it a different way. So Rava, top of the page on Sadi Vav Man Aleph. So Rava Savar like Rabbi Yonasan, Matar like Rabbi Yonasan. The tiny learn Brisa im balav imo. It's lo yishalim. If the owners are with him, in other words, if he's borrowing out of the animal, also the owners with him, then lo yishalim. Mashma the ise b'tavayu. It's mashma that even whether he's borrowed, the owner is borrowed during both the time, during the time of borrowing the animal and the time of the incident, or even only just one of them, then he's pater. As long as either one of the times he's working for the guy, then he's pater. Then it says ba'alav einimo shalom yisham. But if the owner is not with him, right, he shall pay. Mashma delesa b'darvayu. Mashma nami l'chiise b'chada v'lesa b'chada. It's mashma that either or, even if he's not with him at all, or not with one of them, he's still chayiv. In other words, because he's not chayiv throughout the time. Only if he's with him throughout the time. So lamar lecha, to tell you, haya ima b'shas sheila ein tzrich liyos ima b'shas shavua umesa. If he was with him during this man of when he actually borrowed the animal, he was already working for the guy. Then he doesn't even have to be working for the time when he's working. The time of the incident happens, and therefore he would be pater from that. And Hayim Abashas Shvur Mesa. But if he was only with the animal time of the accident, certainly you'd have to be at the time of when he borrowed it. If it wasn't at the time that borrowed it, then the borrower would be chai because the owner was not with him when he borrowed the animal. So the Gemara says Eipok. So we have 2 points of times. So both Abai and Rava agreed that since mashma that one of the times is the essential time, that is the essential time of when I borrowed the animal. So if I borrowed the animal on Sunday and then on Monday I told the guy, hey, can I borrow you for your work and you work for me? Thank you. And then on Tuesday the incident happened. So the 2 kizmanim are Tuesday when the incident happens and Sunday when I borrowed the animal. Both Abaye and Rava agree that the key time we see as to whether that the borrower is pater. Now remember, the borrower will be pater if the owner is working also for him, if he's borrowed the owner also, is only at the time of when I borrowed the animal. But if he was not working for me when I borrowed the animal, then even though he was working for me when the time of the accident happens, it's not considered to be Baal of Imo. So therefore, so that's the key time. So the Gemara says, I epochano. Why don't you switch it around? Maybe the key time is when the accident happens. If the accident happens, right, and the husband and the owner is working at the time, so therefore I'm pater. No, the key time is when he borrowed it, because that's really when the animal became into the borrower's possession. So Gemara says, well, Lamaisa, the accident is the most important part because the accident happened. That's when we're going ahead and assessing the damage. That's when he's chayv. So the Gemara says, well, Elo Shila, Shabura Mesa, my if you never borrowed it, then we wouldn't care whether it, broke its leg or it died, right? Who cares? So therefore, the key time is the borrowing it. So the Gemara says, okay, well, I can flip it around and say to you, Vilav Shabura Mesa, if it didn't go ahead and die or broke, if that was the essential time, Shayla, my Avi, right? Then in such a case, right, who cares if he borrowed it if no accident ever happened? So the Gemara says, no, the time, the most important moment is when he borrows the animal. If the owner is also working for him, that's the time to see whether that the borrower is chayv or pater. Why? Because at that point, when he borrows the animal, that's when he becomes chayv and mesainas, and therefore that's really a change in the status. Therefore, that we look at that moment in time as to whether it's considered a bail of emo or not. Fine. A third of the way down.
Actual owner being paid and is not being paid.
Whether he's hired out by him, it doesn't make a difference.
I believe that's called working for free. Can I borrow you and your animal and your truck?
Yeah, that was. That's only to be my point, but there was to say that the owner becomes a public.
Yeah.
And whatever.
Right, but he's not owned by the other person, right? It's not an effort. We'll soon see later, right? So we'll soon see if someone. We'll have this later on. A person rents something, then he also rents out the owner to work with it. So even in that case, it's considered to be Baal of Imo. The important issue is that the owner was there, even though he's working for me and I'm paying him, right? But since he's there, he's the one more responsible for the animal. In other words, if my kid sleeps over, at your house, so I'm trusting you. But if I'm sleeping over with my kid, so even though my kid is sleeping in your house, but Lamaisa, the father's also there, so the father's more responsible. So too, the logic is that since the owner is there, whether he's getting paid or not, he's really, the one that's keeping an eye on the animals. Right.
Which is why he should be responsible if the cow dies or whatever.
Right. So even though he is getting paid, so Lamaisa, maybe we can still, go on the other one. So let's see now. Ravashi Omar Kra, the pasuk says V'chiyishal Ishmei Merehu. So Ravashi actually brings another source. He says V'chiyishal Ishmei Merehu V'lo Reyehu Imo Shalom Yishalom. It says who knows when he borrows something from a friend and not when the friend is with him. Shalom Yishalom. Then he goes ahead and pays. In other words, only the guys. But if the owner was with the animal, he borrowed it at the same time. Not only borrowing the animal, borrowing the service of the owner. Then he potters. The word says Ihachi Baal of Enimo V'Baal of Imo Lamli. If that's the case. What's the point of the other pasuk? It says Baal of Enimo or Baal of Imo, then Shalom Mishalem, all right, or Ein Shalom Mishalem is Ilav Hida Chavavino Hai Orchid the Crow. If that was the case, I wouldn't have really been Meduyak in the pasuk. I would have just thought it was natural. It wasn't we don't really? It was an expression of him borrowing the animal, not necessarily him borrowing the animal with its own. So person goes ahead and borrows an animal for. To be roveh the animal, to sodomize the animal, right? For his own, sick pleasure. Now, Do we say they have to borrow in the way that people borrow it, and people don't borrow in this manner, and therefore it's not considered to be shayel? I do about tamamai mishum, or the other is the person when he borrows an animal, he wants to get some sort of pleasure from it, hana from it, and the ma'asav hainami ha yislay hana, and he's getting hana in this manner, right? From this deviant manner. Another question. So shaylo liroy's ba ma'u. Let's say a person borrows the animal. I trip over, right? If he goes ahead and he wants to have it just to show that he's, he has, he's kosher enough. He has a horse or an animal, right? So he's not using it all. So I'm borrowing the animal, and I'm just, to borrow it, right? To show that, I'm wealthy enough to have an animal. Do we say that I have to borrow an item of value and I'm borrowing an item of value? Or maybe it's if I go ahead and borrow something in order to get hana, and in this case, I'm not getting any hana. I'm just doing it for people to see it. What about this case? Shayla says, "What if I borrow an animal to go ahead and do work for less than a pruta? Mahu. Do I need to just borrow an object which is worth a pruta? And on my side did I do pruta, or maybe anything less than a pruta is nothing, and therefore, since I borrowed it to do work less than a pruta, maybe it's not considered to be shila that I'd be chayiv for." Or what about this one? What if I borrow two animals to go ahead and do the amount of work that costs one pruta? Do we say you go after the total amount that was borrowed from the borrower and the lender, and therefore lamaisa there's a pruta worth of work. I did or maybe you go after the actual cow, and each one is only doing half pruta work. And each one, therefore, is not doing a pruta work. It's not like I'm borrowing the animal. It's not right. It's not quote unquote borrowing for services because it didn't do any service. Or what about this case? Shalom Shutfin. So let's say I borrow from two partners, right? Two guys own animal, and I borrow the animal of an and I ask one of them to go ahead and perform work for me. So Mahu, what do we say in this case? Now, is this case considered to be Shela B'Balav? Mahu, Kula B'Alav B'inan V'Halaka. Do I need all the owners of all the lenders of the animal to be working for me? And you don't have it. Only one of the partners are. I do, or maybe, let's say Lamaisa, something happens to the animal. So for half of it, I'm putter because half of it was owned by one of the guys who were working for me. Or what about the opposite case? Shutin Shishalu, two partners go ahead and they borrow from one guy, and then the owner of the animal who lent it to two partners, he works for one of the guys. Somehow, do we say that Kula Shayel Ba'in and Veleka? Do we say that he has to go ahead and be working for both of them, and then the Shayel is not? I do, the Shayel Miftar. Or do we say that Lamaisa to the one of the borrowers that he worked for, that person is Pater because the Shayel was working for him? Or Shalma Isha. Or what about this case? You go ahead and you borrow from a woman. Now, a woman, her nichse maluk, she owns the land. Mm-hmm. The husband owns the Heros, right? So who owns the land? So it depends, right? She owns the physical land, but he has the rights to the fruits, for all the years while they're married. So Shalma Isha v'nisha Baila. So let's say a person borrows from the land from a woman, or even let's say an animal. Let's say it was an animal from the woman, v'nisha Baila. And then the husband is working for the borrower. Is that considered to be that Baal of Emo, right? Does the fact that he has the rights to the fruits of whatever he's borrowing, does that make him the owner and therefore Shidon Baal or not? Or vice versa. Isha Shala, a woman borrows, Venisha Labal. Right? So if she goes ahead and she borrowed, and then then we say in this case that the what's it called? Let's say so then the services were of the lender, so she borrowed it, but the services were done to the Baal Mao. So basically, Kenyan pairs to Kenyan goof dummy. Although, do we say that the rights to the fruits is like owning the itself or not? What about this case? Person says to his shliach, say, "V'hishali imparasi." Go ahead, do me a favor. Go lend out the animal and lend yourself also out with my animal. Mahu. Do we say that the owners had the mamish be with it, and therefore guys are shliach? I do adam kamaisa, or do we say that no shliach adam kamaisa? And you do have this case. So Baal pluksa the Rabbi Yechanan v'reish lakish. So the machlokes when it comes to the hazu, the niksei malug, in other words, the rights to the fruits, that's a well-known machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Shlagush, as we'll soon see. And shaliach, when it comes to shaliach, that is a pluksa de Rabbi Yonis and Rabbi Yesha. That's a machlokes between Rabbi Yonis and Rabbi Yesha. Let's see. So Baal, when it comes to the husband, his rights to the niksei malug, is he considered to be the owner or not? That's a pluksa de Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shlagush. The itamah that we learn over there. Person goes ahead and he sells his field to his friend just for the rights to the fruits. In other words, I'll sell you my land, but just for the rights of the fruits. And I was the principal still mine, but you get all the fruits. So Rabbi Yochanan says you bring bikurim and you state the psukim. No, maybe you bring bikurim, but you don't go ahead and read the psukim. So Rabbi Yochanan maybe bikurim. Why?
Rented out the land.
Just the land. No. I basically I sell you the land, but only the rights to the fruits, not the land itself. Right. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, he says maybe Vikari, he goes in and brings bikurim just like anybody else. Why? Because kinina payers kinina gufdami. Owning the rights to the fruits is tantamount to owning the land itself, and therefore you're like everybody else. So therefore, according to him, a husband is like the owner of the niksei maluk because you have the rights to the fruits. You're like you have the rights to the land. And both of them are owners. No, you go ahead and bring ve'enokari. Why? Because kina peres la kina gufdami. Yes, there is an aspect of ownership, but it's not like owning the land, and therefore you would not be maybe vikari. And shaliach, when it comes to shaliach, that's also machlokes b'fluk so that Rabbi Yonis and Rabbi Yesha. The Tanya the Rabbi Sa'im Rabbi Shabbos. Person says to his administrator, "Kol nadarim shedei ishti nidarais mikan ad shava mimakom plani." Listen, I'm going out of town for a month. Any dar my wife makes, do me a favor, go ahead and be in my place and revoke any of her vows, nullify her vows, right? Be mefer her nadar. So Hefirla, so Mimakam Shaplani. So Hefirla, go ahead and do it. For Hefirla, Yachal Yemufar. Maybe you think it'd be nullified. Tamaloymar, Isha Yikimena v'Isha Ifirena, right? Only the husband, he can go ahead and keep, right, her husband, right? Isha, right, with the dugation, the hate, right? So it says her husband, he is Mekai in the nether, and he is the only one who can be made for the nether. Rabbi Yesha, that's called Rabbi Yesha. So the Shaliach, his Hafara does not work. And Rabbi Yonasan, the sheikh is like any other person, it replaces him, therefore he could revoke the vows. And therefore, back in our place, if I tell you to lend out my cow and lend out your services, you're in lieu of the owner. Therefore, that's considered to be Shabu Balav, and therefore that shaliach is just like the husband. So Amar there's L'Rava, what a person says to his eved, right? He owns the eved. Go ahead and lend out my cow, and you also get lend out with its services. Mao, we can ask either according to both opinions between Machlokes and Rabbi Yesha and Rabbi Yonasan, whether or not we say the shliach is just like a person or a shliach is not. You can say according to the question that says that shliach is just like a person. Sahani mili shliach the bar mitzvah. That's only because the shliach is also a full-fledged Jew. Aval eved, but an eved delav bar mitzvah lo. But an eved who is not bar mitzvah, maybe it would not be considered to be sheilah balav. Dilma, or you can ask the other side, the other extreme. Normally, when we say the shliach cannot take a person's place in order to be considered to the owner, to be lent out with the services of the animal, hani mili shliach. That's only referred to a shliach because he's somebody else. About eved, but an eved, yad eved kiyad rabbi dam yad. Right, eved, his hand is just like the master's hand, and therefore maybe the eved actually could take the, even though normally shliach cannot take the place of the owner, maybe the shliach, the eved could. Now, it's logical to say that at least this teretz still be mataris that the eved is just like the master, and therefore, if the cow was lent out with the eved, there's considered to be sheva balav. This is an eved kanani. Bottom line, so when it comes to a husband, when it comes to the nechasim of his wife, is he a shayel habi? A seicher happy, right? Is he considered to be a borrower when he's using it, or is he like a renter? Now, so if you really think about it, so the woman brings the assets into the house. In addition to land, she can bring animals. So the animals. So how would it work? The animals are hers, but any of the plowing fees, whatever it is, that goes to the husband. Like that's the nichsei maluk. That's the peros. So now, If he's now the woman, right, in theory, technically, right, is working for him, right? She has to provide, for her husband. So it's the woman is like, so he's borrowing something. He's borrowing the cow, right? If he's a shale, and he's borrowing her services. So maybe if something happens to the animal, he'd be put there. It's sheba balam, right? So do we say shel havi? A shemer havi, or excuse me, a seicher havi, or is he like a renter? His ownership to the animal is like a seicher. So Gemara says, Amarava, the film shibashta, right? Because you're so quick, you might have made a mistake. Because Mamanav Shach, either way. Ishel Havi, if the owner is considered, if the husband is considered to be a Bauer Havi, so Shila Balami. If he's Shila Balami Pater, he's Seich Havi, Skiris Balami. That's the same thing as Skiris Balam, right? In other words, even if he's going ahead and renting it, he's Skiris Balami. So Ella, right? So rather we say, Ki Boile, what was the question? Ki Boile, the Agar Mine Para, right? We're talking about a case over here where he says over here that so he says over here. So Elok the Rabban Rechama Dogger Mine. I'm just trying to. You got that covered? Oh, you're good. All right. Have a good day. So he say Kivoy the Rabban Rechama Dogger Mine part of the Hadar Naswa. So let's say over here. Let's say a person rented a cow from a woman. Right? So I rented a cow from a woman January 1st, right? And then afterwards, I married her, right? Afterwards, so then basically she only lent her services when I married her February 1st, right? So the time when I borrowed it or when I rented it, right? It was just a rental, right? And now a month later, I married her. So it's not like the same time where she was Balaam, right? Or I married her first and she was first working for me at the time I took the animal, right? That was afterwards, came opposite. So do we say Agamine part of the Hadanasba? So Shel Havi, Havi, is he considered to be a borrower? No, did I basically borrow the in other words, borrower, or is he a renter? What do you mean? So Shel Havi, do we say he's a shale, he's borrowing it? Right, the Asya Shale Babalim, Mafkil. And do we say now that basically, since I married her, I'm no longer renting it because before I didn't own her, right? Or quote unquote own her, right? So her property wasn't my property. So therefore, do we say that originally on January 1st, I was just a renter, but now, right, comes February 1st, right? In other words, I have now been borrowing her and her services, and therefore we basically uprooted the renting without owners, and therefore it's be considered to be borrowing the animal now with owners. I do or maybe I'm a renter now, and therefore, since it was originally a rental, it's still a rental, and that rental would remain of rental without the owners. So the Gemara says, I understand. Your whole story is if he was a borrower when he gets married to her, and therefore the borrowing of the animal or of her animals because he's the husband now is considered to be shiva balam, and therefore it uproots the original rental that he did in January 1st. So even if he's a seicher, the rental now, even if I'm considered to be a rental when it comes to my wife's property, but so I'm renting a babalim, that should uproot the rental shalom babalim. It's the same logic. Just like now I'm a shale, right, babalim, and it uproots the skiros shalom babalim. So too, it could be the skiros babalim, and which I'll be potter for versus before. Rather, we say like Rechama. Going to Aga Ihi Parabialma. She went ahead and she rented a cow from somebody else on January 1st, right? The Hadar and Nazman. Afterwards, on February 1st, I went ahead and I married her. The Aliba de Rabbanan, the Amri, and then what happens? Now, so normally if I rent something from Mark, okay, and then I lend it out to Alan, okay, now you're a borrower. I'm a renter to you, right? So therefore, let's say it gets.
If you rent something, you're allowed to lend it out to somebody else since you don't own it.
So yeah, but I'm still responsible for it. But we'll soon see. So let's say now. So in this case, right, the shell could be the other way. If I borrow it, can I rent it out? But if I rent it, right now, because Alan has a higher level of responsibility. Now, normally, if I rent it, so I'd be part from Gneva of Aveda, right? Alan is a borrower, is Kai for Gneva of Aveda. So now, if something happens to the hamster, I rent it from Mark, right? And then Alan borrows it from me and something happens to it. So now, does Alan pay me, right? If it was stolen, and then I go ahead and maybe I can swear it to Mark, it was stolen out of there. Or does Alan go ahead and pay Mark directly? So it's a machlokes. According to the Rabbanan, the Amri Shel Mishalim Seicher, that the borrower pays directly to the renter, right? So Devada Shel Balami. So over here, so now in this scenario, right? So Mark basically rented to, we'll say like Mark rented to me, and I'm the woman, basically in our case, right? And then Alan marries me. So once Alan marries me, and I was renting something from Mark, it's like he's borrowing this item. Listen, it's 2024. We could do this, right? So I say in this case, yes. So I say, so in this case, so I believe there. So and afterwards, so that he marries. If I leave it there, that means Shayel Mishal Mesaycher. Then according to the borrower, that he goes ahead and he pays the renter. Like it's no question. The Vadai Shayel Bailam. So certainly this is Shayel Bailam he, right? So, and therefore, because Alan, who's Al Chayiv to pay me? So Alan is like a borrower using my services, right? Because I'm his wife, and therefore Alan's pater from paying me, right? So what's the shayla? That Alan should really make a direct payment to Mark. We don't care that the renter is working for you. So, what do we see over there? Is Alan considered to be a shayl havi? When Alan goes ahead and marries me, now is he considered to be a bower of my malug, or is he seichav, or is he considered to be a renter? Now, if he was a bower, he'd be chayiv. If he's a renter, he'd be potter. So, I'm a rava, bow, lo shayl havi, lo seichav. Neither one. Ella like keachavi. Rather, he's a purchaser. And where do we see this? From the Rabbi Yisrael Chanina, Rabbi Yisrael Chanina, Busha, Iskino, in Usha, they were masakein. Haisha Tamacha Benixem Malug B'chai Bala Haba Umesa. Now, if a woman goes ahead, she gets married on January 1st, the husband has the use of her lands, and then she sells on June 1st, she sells it to somebody else, and then later on, she dies. So the guy says, okay, I bought it from the woman, give me my land. So that, well, tough luck, because you bought it on June 1st. I married her on January 1st. I had the rights to the fruits then, and by me marrying her, I'm like a buyer. So unless you bought it before she got married, right, the rights before she got married, I was the original buyer, and therefore it remains with the husband. And therefore we see that the husband is not considered to be a bower to the woman's malug. He's not considered to be a renter. Rather, he's considered to be a buyer. So, remember, another question was raised. About benichsa ishto mimo. So what about this? Let's say the woman inherits stuff from her father, and some of the stuff is stuff that was left over for hektish. So when it comes into the malug, so the land comes to her. So who has violated Me'ilah? Right, the land comes to her. Let's say it was makdish the land. So is it the husband because he has the rights to the fruits, or is it the wife? So mimo automatically. So Amar of a man limo. Who should we mo? Limo bal. If you're going to say the husband is automatically mo because she inherited stuff that was hektish, the heter nichle delikni isur loy nichle delikni. So he doesn't want to acquire malug that is me'ilah, right? That is stuff that is hektish. So Chazal is not going to put it in his hand. That's not a benefit to the husband, that type of malug, stuff that becomes usher, and all of a sudden he violates me'ilah automatically. So what do you say, Timal Ihi? She gets the heter nami loy nichala delikno nimo. So he says delikni, even by her. So she doesn't want to inherit things that should be violating me'ilah. Let her not inherit that. So who are you going to say? Nimo Basin. So Basin is violating Me'ilah by putting it in the property when the father dies in the possession of the daughter. When the Rabbanan made a takana, he says balok. So we say even that balok right, when they say that the husband is righteous, is only when it comes to heter, but not going to isser. Baal Molk Shayetzi. No. The question was, when is the husband violate Mila? And he only violates Mila when he goes ahead and spends it. Just like any other case, a person goes ahead and spends most hektish tuchul. The question was asked. Let's say I go ahead and I borrow the animal from you. I'm going to go ahead and use it to plow, and then all of a sudden I weaken the animal. So I understand. So Masha from here, you say I should be high for making it, weakening it from plowing. But let's say even if it dies, right? And why should I, the borrower, be chayiv? I said, let me borrow your ox to go ahead and plow. So why should I be chayiv? Name a lav lukma bechilta. I didn't borrow your ox to go ahead and sit in my barn. I borrowed it to plow. If it was not fit for plowing, you shouldn't have lent it to me. By the fact that you lent to me the ox, you knew I was going to plow with it. So therefore, it shouldn't be on me. It should be on you.
Wear and tear.
Right. So when you get this animal, the animal dies, mesa machmas malacha, when it's doing the actual work that I rented it out for or that I borrowed it for, right? I should be putter. And let's say it just died naturally, so maybe I'm chai. But if it died while doing the work that I was supposed to be doing, maybe I should be putter. Not only case if I borrowed it to go ahead and plow and I return it, it comes weaker, then I'm putter from that case because we were plowing. Even if it dies from doing work and it died on my field, the borrower is putter. I didn't go ahead and borrow it for it to go ahead and be sitting in the barn. All right, we'll stop over here. Tomorrow appears to be a shorter daf. Tomorrow's also a Tuesday. So